For every 119 persons vaccinated, one will be protected from infection. That's from an open letter to Joe Biden and Boris Johnson and various parties that also makes the point that your risk of an adverse side effect from the vaccines is greater than your risk of hospitalization from COVID. The author of that open letter, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, joins me now. That's actually quite a staggering number, because if we'd been told that 18 months ago, the whole conversation would have been entirely different.
It's a very good point, Mark. So to talk about what you were mentioning earlier about certainty in medicine, medical evidence, in the history of medical evidence, today's truth may be tomorrow's folly. And medicine, unlike physics or chemistry, is not an exact science, it's an art, and it's based upon information that we're given at a particular time, and it's often the art of probabilities. But to answer your question more specifically, yes, looking back at that original trial that led to the approval of the Pfizer vaccine and many other vaccines, if we talk about the Pfizer vaccine, for example, that trial, it showed this 95% relative risk reduction in infection. Everyone took on board as thinking 95. If 100 people were exposed, 95 would be protected, which is not the case. It was 0.84% from infection, if we trust that data implicitly, which, of course, many people did, even though that data has never been released for independent analysis, which is something we're advocating for. But in addition to that, Mark, that trial didn't show any reduction in death rates from COVID, statistically significant death rates from COVID, or all-cause mortality. So everything we had to go on at the beginning was based upon that figure that was exaggerated in terms of its benefits. I was one of those people that was one of the first to take, I'm double jabbed. I had the vaccine in January 2021 after volunteering in the vaccine center. Even though I was young, I did it because I thought it was going to protect my patients from getting COVID. And, the information has evolved since then considerably. I've spent many months critically analyzing data, speaking to many eminent scientists in Oxford, in Stanford, in Harvard, speaking to Pfizer whistleblowers, and critically looking at that data in its totality. And the situation has very much changed. So now we have, we talked about this was, in reference to the ancestral strain of the virus, which was much more lethal, and it was, certainly, especially for the elderly, it was awful, certainly in 2020, what we experienced then. What's circulating now, Mark, and it's interesting you mentioned Sajid Javid talking about this booster program, is essentially, and this is good news, it's reassuring news, the Omicron strain that is circulating at the moment is no more lethal than the flu. Right. We don't scare people to death around the flu. We shouldn't be scaring people to death around Omicron either.
But one of the things you talk about is the loss of trust. I mean, we have seen that the take-up, for example, in America, you're supposed to get your 6-month-old boosted, but apparently I think it's only 11% of parents of children, and have taken their kids to get these things. So these vaccines are declining in popularity. Because there's a lack of trust in what the experts say. Now, when you talk about that, that 1 in 19 people will be protected from infection, the people who signed off on these vaccines in the public health bureaucracies of the West, they must have known that, mustn't they?
Mark, I wouldn't say necessarily they did. I mean, I've spoke to very senior doctors, leaders in the last few weeks. I've been giving lectures. I actually gave a lecture only a few weeks ago during the BMA annual conference. And attending that conference were senior doctors, leaders like the chair of the BMA, the president of the BMA, the deputy chair of the BMA. And they were quite shocked with some of the information I was sharing with them. So, for example, one very senior NHS leader was shocked to learn that the regulator that approves these vaccines, the MHRA, receive 86% of their funding from the pharmaceutical industry. He didn't believe it, actually, and then the BMJ exposed that only shortly afterwards. And they were also saying to me, it was interesting. I had a conversation with one of these NHS leaders, and he said to me, Aseem, I don't think many people in these roles who are promoting the vaccine are critically appraising the evidence themselves, and they are getting most of their information from the BBC. Now, this is not unusual, because Rochelle Walensky, the former chair of the CDC, actually admitted not so long ago her optimism for the vaccine
Yeah.
came from a CNN news report, which Paul Thacker,
Right.
investigative journalist, basically exposed as being almost an identical. It was essentially the press release of Pfizer that was a CNN news report. So this is quite.
Pfizer write the press release for the CNN guy. Somebody in the public health bureaucracy of the United, most lavishly funded public health bureaucracy, watches the CNN news report and thinks, oh, everything's hunky-dory. But the problem here is that when you say, like, the regulatory body in the United Kingdom, the Medical Health and Regulatory Agency, MHRA, is 86% funded by Big Pharma. Now, 50 years ago, when everybody was worried about lung cancer from smoking, and if you had said, oh yes, we've got our Ministry of Health is 86% funded by Philip Morris and the big tobacco companies, people would have leapt up and said, this is crazy. Why aren't they leaping up now?
I think because they don't know it so much, Mark, and that's important that we have these conversations and we're getting this message out to, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And that's the main reason people aren't aware. So what I say is, to paraphrase Noam Chomsky, the American economist, the doctors and the general population don't know what's happening, and they don't even know that they don't know.
Yes.
So I think people need to understand the structures that are in place that allow what ultimately is misinformation, or certainly misleading information, to disseminate amongst doctors and the population, is rooted in too much unchecked power by entities whose only purpose is to gain profit, not to look after your health. And I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry here. And they have captured the regulator. And just, Donald Light, sociologist in the BMJ, recently said, people need to understand that the regulators are, as long as they continue to be captured by industry, cannot be trusted, because they are selective, they withhold data, and then this ultimately has a detrimental effect if they are approving drugs without rigorous, independent, critical analysis of what that data tells us, and then how does that data get translated into the conversation between you and I, between the doctor and the patient or the member of the public. So if the doctors are misinformed, the patients then get misled and misinformed.